Hello, everyone. My name is Santiago, and today we will be reading another article from this great magazine called Harvard Business Review. And the article that we will be reading and reviewing today is called How Colorism Affects Women at Work. I thought this was actually a really interesting topic to take a look in, and it was written by Rushika Tulshiam and posted on April 7th of the current year 2023. So let's get started. For this one, we'll be just skipping this summary since it is a little bit longer, but we will just get started. Colorism or skin tone bias is an insidious form of bias that impacts women with darker skin tones across ethnicities and races. Let me just take a look. Yeah, and racist, and it is an issue that it is that isn't on many leaders' radars. An inclusive leader managing a diverse team must become aware of how colorism manifests not only among employees of different identities, but even among people from the same community who have different skin tones. Disrupting these biases in action could boost inclusion profoundly. However, one of the most insidious aspects of colorism is that it is tough to prove, and there is often no resource for those who experience it. Take Mira, for example. When she moved to the United States from India to take on a role at a large consulting firm, she was thrilled to see another Indian woman on her team. As she navigated a new country and workplace country, she was hopeful that working with someone with identities in common will help her build trust and advance her leadership on the team. But soon she was surprised to find that her Indian colleague and other members of the team will ignore her or look away when she talk in meetings. She was routinely left off important emails and excluded from discussions. She was puzzled, but when she asked her manager for feedback, they said she was performing at the highest level. The final straw came a few years later when her manager asked a junior team member to make a client presentation for for a project Mara had been leading. Spend I spent years studying myself, wondering what it was about me that wasn't acceptable or professional. As I saw other women with similar identities and skill as me progress, there was only one explanation that made sense. She said, her darkest skin color. I was so shocked, honestly, in denial until I couldn't ignore it. I thought discrimination based on darkest skin was an issue I would escape when I left India. But in the US, at a top company, I had followed me right back. Research shows Mira experience with colorism is far from isolated. A new report from Catalyst evaluated data from 2007 3,400 women from marginalized racial and ethnic groups from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and South Africa. The study outdoors found that 51% of women from those groups have experienced racism in their current workplace. For women with darker skin tone, that can go as high as 69%. Skin tone can be a bigger determinant of whether someone gets a job than their educational background. According to the University of Georgia researcher Matthew Harrison, in the United States alone, one study found out that Black Americans with lighter skin have higher socioeconomic status and tend to marry people with higher socioeconomic status, leading the authors to include that the impact of skin color or shade was impactful as race in American socioeconomic status. In Mira's case, she had no official proof of experiencing colorism, and her challenge couldn't be explained by gender, racial, or ethnic discrimination. So she was left without the case to be made to her manager or HR. Eventually, she left that lucrative job to start her own business. What Mara went through, it is an unusual. I typically don't make the business case um, but uh, New Boston Consulting Group research continues to prove why leaders should address this issue, even for business reasons. Employees who can be their authentic selves at work are happier, more motivated to give their best, and nearly 2.4 times less quietly and likely to quit. So, how can leaders prevent women of color from experiencing colorism at work and make sure they don't live? Here are three ways to disrupt colorism in the workplace. The first one that we will find when it comes to colorism is what we call educate yourself on the impacts of colorism. Many women of color take tremendous risks in their quest for lighter skin by using skin lightening products. There are multi-billion dollar skin lightening industries worldwide, with the US making up one third of the market. Chemicals like mercury and hydroquinone in this product have been linked to the lasting skin discoloration, damage to eyes, kidneys, and lungs, and actually birth defects when used during pregnancy. The World Health Organization has called it global health crisis. This is what happens when the onus to fix systems of oppression in place on those most impacted by it. The message that darker skin tones are somehow inferior to lighter skin tones is delivered to children at a young age and reinforced by Hollywood and popular media. It's no wonder that colorism extends into the workplace, causing disadvantages for dark skinned women in accessing job opportunities, career advancement, and societal acceptance. Still, most white leaders are even aware of colorism. Say Janice Kassam Asare, PhD, DYE consultant and author of Decentering Whiteness in the Workplace. Leaders are just getting to the point where there is openness in discussion the white dominant and culture. There is a hesitancy to discuss issues like anti-blackness, so colorism isn't often a topic. I see being discussed by corporate leaders. For non-white people of the global majority, colorism is definitely something we are aware of, even if we don't want to admit it. The term colorism is believed to have been coined by novelist Alice Walker in 1982. It refers not only to the preference for lighter skin between racial and ethnic communities, but also within those communities. Colorism is enduring vestige of colonialism and white dominance around the globe and disproportionately harms women of color. The first step in addressing colorism is to be able to spot this insidious and covert from bias in action. This is precisely why it is necessary for leaders to educate themselves on it. I've learned tremendously from the book Color Matters, Skin Tone Bias and the Myth of Post-Racial America by Washington University professor Kimberly J. Norwood. Gazam SR recommends the work of international colorism expert Sarah L. Webb and T.K. Saku, who runs the Darkest Hoe, an educational Instagram account that aims to uplift the stories of darker skinned black women or women. The second way to work and avoid colorism is learn to identify and disrupt colorism. Leaders can actively address skin tone discriminations within their organizations by learning how to identify it in the first place. First one, audit whether your team organization reflects the full diversity of society in terms of race and gender, but also skin tones. Reflect on your team's dynamics. Who gets the customer facing or more visible opportunities? Are darker skinned team members part of them? This also applies to the hiring new employees. What will you discover if you reflect upon the skin tones that the last five people your organization hired? If there were people, of course, hired, were they of varying skills, tones, or very similar? Were darker skinned people, particularly women, more likely to be hired for roles that they were overqualified for, or rejected for roles that they were eminently qualified for? Once you begin to see these patterns, they become harder to ignore. Proactively notice if darker skinned team members or job candidates are being treated differently. Then speak up to disrupt the bias. Leaders must amplify all voices and call out biases and barriers. Um, when only lighter skinned employees are favored for planned roles, advancement, higher pay, or customer facing and other high visibility opportunities. Second, unless it's deeply permanent to work, people should avoid discussing or making observations about a colleague's skin color. My white peers often compliment on my tan when I return from vacation in the sun. As a woman of color with lighter skin privilege, I am able to brush it off. But for my darker skinned people of color who have may experienced comments of marginalization within their communities, I've s- I've s- I've since learned this type of subtle act of exclusion called be re-traumatizing. If you witness either disrupt in the moment by saying something like, we didn't comment on each other's appearance here, or bring up privately with the commenter. Taking a longer view, leaders must ensure employees understand why it can be exclusionary to make comments on a peer's appearance or skin color at work. Extend managers' training programs to include educating them on how various biases show up to work and how to take action when they witness it on their teams. To be comprehensive, it is necessary to raise awareness of how even seemingly well meaning comments like the ones I receive on my vacation 10 are exclusionary and biased. I can overstate the importance of identifying these biases in the first place to be able to address them. This applies to anyone who has lighter skin. I've had to educate myself and become aware of it as much as white peers too. If Mira's manager had been educated on colorism and observed the discriminatory term team dynamics, they will have been able to disrupt the bias she faced, and she might have stayed with the organization actually. And the third way to fight with colorism is ensure colorism is included in organization-wide DEI awareness. Actively consider and amplify the perspective of employees from historically underestimated groups. Gassama recommends giving employees a forum to discuss their experiences with colorism. Corporations should amplify their care skin employees and their experiences and include conversation about colorisms in DEI education, she said. Creating an inclusive workplace for people with darker skin tones, it is not a one-on-one fix. Simple taking an anti-colorism stance by itself, it isn't good enough. Real change can happen only when leaders proactively educate themselves and their teams about how colorism shows up in the workplace and its outside impacts on a person's career. For global organizations, hire local DEI practitioners to provide expertise on how skin tone bias may show up in the market. Also, lighter skinned individuals are more likely to be hired, promoted, and advanced to leadership compared with their darker skinned counterparts across the globe. Local nonsense could differ. For example, certain communities might use specific words that you're not aware of to refer to dark-skinned people, and colorism intercepts with and often exacerbates other forms of discrimination, such as caste bias in India and among the Indian diaspora. State and reiterate that colorism won't be tolerated on your team and your organization. Articulating this often enables others to report experiences or witnessing colorism. The Catalyst reports found that 67% of women from marginalized racial and ethnic groups who work in climate of silence, or an environment where employees feel restrained from constructively speaking about organizational or work-related problems, concerns, or challenges, experience racism at work, compared with 46 of those who work in more psychologically safe organizations. Colorism is an insidious, globally prevalent bias that deeply impacts the lives and livelihoods of darker skinned women. Leaders must become aware not only of how they may have perpetuated, but they must also push back against it when they see it. As gruesome as are at, DIY consultant Dr. Sarah Webb has talked about how it is impossible to eradicate racism if we are not also focused on dismantling colorism. When people discount the impact of skin tone bias, they willfully ignore harmful ways to certain people can progress while others are left behind. An important part of addressing racism requires us to recognize ways that systems and structures grant us the power to wield over others, she said. Eh, I think this is the final of the article. So, hablando un poco más acerca del resumen, creo que es un artículo muy poderoso inicialmente porque nos está brindando un poco más o nos está abriendo un poco más la mente acerca de cómo funciona el colorismo, ¿cierto? Que creo que es un término que no es muy usado como tal aquí en Latinoamérica o específicamente en Colombia. Se suele usar más que todo el tema del racismo, ¿cierto? Pero el colorismo no era algo que se mencione mucho, ¿cierto? Realmente el colorismo y el racismo, pues ahí podemos encontrar las diferencias de los nombres. El colorismo hace referencia al color, a tu tipo de piel, al tono de tu piel, y el racismo como tal hace referencia a la raza. Entonces, pues aquí nos están contando inicialmente, como para empezar a entender un poco más cómo funciona esto, la historia déjenme busco rápidamente el nombre de esta persona, Mira, que fue una chica que vino de la India, empezó a trabajar en una firma de consultores, se empezó a dar cuenta que le estaban empezando como tal a tratar diferente, la estaban excluyendo de ciertas reuniones, de ciertos emails, y con el pasar del tiempo se dio cuenta de que había personas que estaban avanzando, pero ella se estaba quedando, ¿cierto? Ella comentó esto con su manager, le explicó cómo se sentía, pero realmente no hubo como tal ninguna acción frente a esta situación. Posteriormente, pues, Mira, pues renunció a la empresa y como tal creó su nueva compañía, ¿cierto? Entonces, creo que es bien importante como tal resaltar los tres puntos en específicos, que es edúcate a ti mismo sobre los impactos del colorismo, ¿cierto? El segundo o la segunda forma de combatir el colorismo es aprende a identificar y quitar o atacar el colorismo, ¿cierto? Nos daban ejemplos de cómo una persona con una piel mucho más blanca, pues llegaba de vacaciones y se veía mucho más bronceada y le decían como tienes la piel súper linda o qué fue lo que te hiciste, pero como tal estos comentarios vendrían a ser obviamente dirigidos a personas de colores más claros, pero estarían excluyendo como tal a personas de tonos de piel un poco más oscuros. Eh, Sobre esto nos habla y esta segunda parte nos dice que cuando veamos ese tipo de situaciones, pues entremos como tal y le dejemos saber a esta persona o el que está comentando como, mira, aquí no hablamos del aspecto de las personas o podría como tal sacarlo a un lado y decírselo de manera privada, ¿cierto? Y la última, como tal, es asegurarte de que el colorismo, ¿cierto? Está incluido en la organización. White, DYE awareness, que es básicamente como cuando tú haces awareness, estás haciendo como concientización del colorismo. Entonces, básicamente nos habla de eso, de hacer concientización en nuestras compañías y organizaciones acerca del que el colorismo existe, educar a nuestros supervisores, educar a nuestros jefes, educar a nuestros managers y abrir espacios de conversación acerca de cómo el colorismo pues afecta a mujeres, que sobre lo que nos hablan en el artículo, pues que tienen tonos de piel un poco más oscuro, ¿cierto? Y cómo prevenir que esto siga sucediendo. Básicamente sobre esto nos habla ese artículo. Muchísimas gracias.